week 2 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers I have is waiver wire pickups this week. The first guy, Devin Duvernay of the Baltimore Ravens. So Duvernay, the deep threat in week 1 here versus the New York Jets for the Ravens, and he had a monster ball game, 4 catches, 54 yards, and 2 touchdowns in that one. So right now, obviously, Baltimore, they need some guys to step up in the receiving core. And Bateman had a touchdown as well in this game here, but obviously Hollywood Brown traded in the offseason to the Arizona Cardinals, and they need to find a deep threat and a number 1 wide receiver on this roster. I know it was the New York Jets in this game. We had a big game, and it was the 2 deep balls that really put his numbers up there for Duvernay. Week 2, it's going to be a stiffer matchup versus the Miami Dolphins, who we just saw pretty much dominate that New England Patriot offense, even though this Patriot offense isn't what the Ravens offense is or as dynamic as it is. But right now, Duvernay available, obviously, in tons of fantasy leagues at 69% of leagues here. And when a guy has a big game like that, then he's available on the waiver wire. Obviously, you got to talk about it, and he's a guy to target. So right now, Duvernay, he could be inconsistent a lot this season. But right now, after a big week 1 performance, he's definitely a wide receiver atop of the list that fantasy owners are going to go out there and try to get him off the wire here for week 2. The second guy is Robby Anderson of the Carolina Panthers. So Robby Anderson, it's just like every season, it's either he's going to have that big ball game on a deep ball or he's going to do nothing. And that's exactly what happened in week 1 here for Anderson. He had a 75-yard touchdown in this game, and him and Baker hooked up on that big one. 5 catches, 102 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for Robby Anderson. So Anderson, a couple seasons ago, he was good in Carolina, but last season it was a down year for him. And so far, off to the big start here in week 1, going over 100 yards with a touchdown. And in week 2, he's got a good matchup at the New York Giants, where their secondary is leaky, even though for the most part they play good defense versus that Tennessee Titan wide receiving core in week 1. But right here, this Panther team, they're going to try to get back on track, I think, after a tough loss versus the Cleveland Browns. And Robby Anderson, like I said, just 1 deep ball it takes for him to have a fantasy day. And I know it's a boom or bust type of thing, but right now, available in 90% of fantasy leagues. And Anderson had a good performance in week 1. And he's another guy I would go out there and add. I'm not going to have high expectations for him or put him in my starting lineup right away, but to add him as a bench piece, if you got someone on your roster that didn't do much or an injury or whatever, then go out there and get Anderson. The next guy, Johann Dotson of the Washington Commanders. So Dotson, what a great game for him for the rookie here in his first career NFL game. 3 catches, 40 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns in that one. So Dotson, he was drafted in the first round of the NFL draft here. And we know the Commanders needed another wide receiver. After the last few seasons, they've had trouble filling in that number 2 spot. So Terry McLaurin, Dotson, and Curtis Samuel, that's a decent 3-receiver set over there for this Washington team. And right here, week 2, he's got another good matchup at the Detroit Lions. We saw the Lions just get shredded through the air from Jalen Hurts and these wide receivers, with A.J. Brown going over 150 yards in week 1 here. So right here, I don't think Dotson's going to get 2 touchdowns again, but right now available in tons of fantasy leagues in 77% of leagues here. And him and Carson Wentz had a good rapport. Dotson's an athletic receiver. He made a crazy touchdown catch that was a very tough one, but he made it look easy. And this was a reason he was a first-round pick in the draft this season. So right now, the Commanders got a good matchup in week 2. They had a great one in week 1, and I think Dotson can help fantasy owners. I don't know if right away he's going to be a start, but as a bench piece, you definitely should go out there and get him this week. The next wide receiver is Jarvis Landry of the New Orleans Saints. So Landry had an under-the-radar good ball game. 7 catches, 114 receiving yards in week 1 here versus the Atlanta Falcons. I know week 2 is a tougher matchup versus the Tampa Bay Bucks that pretty much shut down that Dallas Cowboy offense the whole game, even though we know Dak Prescott got hurt. But Jarvis Landry, he's still a veteran. He still can run the routes, and he still got good hands. And Jameis Winston, they got a pretty decent offense operating over there in New Orleans. So right here, Jarvis Landry going over 100 yards in week 1 under the radar. And he's available still in 58% of fantasy leagues. But we know what he's been over the last few years. Inconsistent is Landry, even though it was tough playing in Cleveland with Baker Mayfield, who struggled a lot, and he was inconsistent himself. So if Winston can be just a little bit consistent this season here, and him finding his wide receivers and getting it into the right spots, I think Landry could be a decent guy and a decent flex option as the season goes on. But right now, I would just pick him up, put him on my bench, and see if this continues, because it's only week 1. I'm not expecting all these guys to stay putting up big games or being guys that can contribute to your fantasy team all season. But right now, after a good week 1 outing, it's guys to talk about and guys that are available on your waiver wire that obviously can help your fantasy team down the line. I looked at this week. Here's DJ Chark for the Detroit Lions. The last few seasons, injuries have been a concern for DJ Chark, where he's missed a lot of time, but in his week 1 debut for the Detroit Lions, 4 catches, 52 yards, a touchdown on 8 targets. And Amon St. Brown had a good ball game as well with a touchdown. So right here, DJ Chark, we saw what he could do a few seasons ago when he was healthy with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and now available in 60% of fantasy leagues here as a number 2 wide receiver on a team that's probably going to be trailing in a lot of ball games and getting a lot of garbage time touches. I think DJ Chark's a decent add this week, and he's got a pretty good matchup in week 2 versus the Washington Commanders. So right now, I will go out there and take a shot with Chark. This Lion team's going to throw a lot this season here, and if you need receiver help with a few guys underperforming or injured here in week 1, I think Chark's a decent add this week. Final receiver I looked at this week's Curtis Samuel with the Washington Commanders. So the Commanders here had a great week 1 ball game on offense here. I don't think all these guys are going to keep this up the whole season, obviously, but week 2, another good matchup at the Detroit Lions that we saw just give up 38 points to the Philadelphia Eagles. And Samuel, he was used in a lot of roles in week 1 versus the Jaguars. He had 4 carries in this one, 17 rush yards. We know Robinson's out a few more weeks here, and Antonio Gibson didn't have the greatest of games carrying the ball, and he also had 8 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown with a fumble loss here. So Samuel, the problem with him throughout his career is just not staying healthy, but he's definitely a versatile player and a receiver that can help fantasy owners and this Washington team if he's going to get targets, and it looks like he did in this ballgame. Also 11 targets in week 1 versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So right here, available in 93% of fantasy leagues. But if I had to pick between him or Dotson, who I mentioned early in the video, out of my Washington Commander receivers, I would go with Dotson. He's more of a playmaker, I feel, obviously younger, and a guy who can make explosive plays. Even though I know it was only 1 game, we saw what he's capable of, and he was a first-round pick for a reason. But you can't go wrong with either guy here. But between the 2 Commander receivers, Dotson will be the guy to get. So that's a few wide receivers I looked at on the wire here for week 2 of the fantasy football season.